going to just kind of open up the session, talking about obviously issues and possibilities of dual and concurrent enrollment. And we'll each be speaking for no more than 8 minutes. And then we want to open it up to the floor for questions, comments, and discussion. So we've also changed the order of how the presentations are going to take place as listed in the AHA guide. So we're actually sitting in the order of the presentation. So first, to my immediate right, is Adam Lowe, who is the first executive director of the National Alliance of Concurrent Enrollment Partnerships, helping to steer a previously all-volunteer professional organization through a time of tremendous growth and transition. Under his leadership, NACEP's accreditation services have professionalized to align with best practices and are more widely recognized by states, institutions, and professional organizations. Next to him is Brenda Santos. Brenda is the Director of History Curriculum and Instruction for Achievement First 15 middle and high schools in Connecticut and New York, and she oversees history curriculum. She has taught in dual enrollment programs in the state of Connecticut, and currently she is a member of the AHA Council on the Teaching Division. Next to Brenda is Trinidad Gonzalez, who is a history instructor at South Texas College, where he has taught dual enrollment for both United States history and Mexican American history. He is currently assistant chair of history for South Texas College, overseeing dual enrollment instructors, and he is also a member of the AHA Teaching Division. And next to Trini is Alec Lichtenstein, who is interim director of the AHR, the American Historical Review. He teaches U.S. and South African history at Indiana University, and he is currently serves as faculty liaison for IU's dual enrollment program in U.S. history. And next to Alex is Eric Tenmes, who is professor of history and is in his 5th year as department chair of Department of History and Anthropology at the University of Central Missouri. He oversees 4 to 6 dual credit courses in introductory history, and his university's dual credit program is applying for accreditation with NACEP this year. I'm actually going to open it. My name is Elaine Carey. I teach Latin American history, and I also chair the history department at St. John's University. I am the VP for the teaching division for 2 more days. As chair of the department, I oversee a dual enrollment program of anywhere to 6 to 12 sections of mostly U.S. survey. And I have recently encouraged my university to join NACEP, although I think accreditation is far in the distance, and you will come to understand why. So what I'm going to do is just open briefly. Most of the panelists on here have worked within state systems or state institutions. I'm at a private institution, so I'm going to talk about dual enrollment as it looks at a private institution. I became chair as interim chair in 2011, and the former chair told me, he said, yeah, you're going to get these syllabi from high school teachers. Just go ahead and approve them and send them back. And I said, okay, and I was wondering, why would I be getting syllabi from high school teachers? And I said, what are they doing? And he said, oh, they're teaching some courses. And I didn't really understand what courses they were teaching or anything like that. And I started to poke around, and they were submitting syllabi, and they were submitting their transcripts, and frequently they were amazing teachers who had been teaching for years and do very innovative things. But also there were teachers that had some really glaring errors. They were teaching history classes. They had no undergraduate degrees in history or advanced training in history. And just so everybody knows, in the New York City public schools, to teach social science, particularly history, you do not have to have a degree in the field. So this was not necessarily their fault. Moreover, there had been little training beyond that. So under Michael Bloomberg, he actually had abolished the social studies office. So remember, Bloomberg had been mayor for quite some time. That has been reinstated under the new mayor. So I began to ask, well, what is this and what are they doing? So this is the question about what is concurrent enrollment. And concurrent enrollment is when high school students are taking courses for college credit. Now, there's a lot of interpretation. They might be actually coming onto campus to take those courses taught by faculty members. Faculty members from the institution that they have an agreement might be going to that campus, or that in fact they are actually taking those courses from a highly trained teacher who is teaching it in their high school, or in fact they may not be. So the question I came in is I started to poke around, how was it working at St. John's? How does concurrent enrollment work? What I found is that we have a very old program. It was founded in 1976. It serves the 5 boroughs, Long Island, New Jersey, Westchester County, and other counties within the New York City metropolitan area. We have 118 partner schools. The program hopes to grow it to 180. We offer 4,000 high school courses for college credit at these multiple institution partnership schools. The annual revenue generated, the last I could get the number, of course this took some real skill getting these numbers, was $3.5 million in annual revenue is generated. That was the last reported, of which my department sees 0. The bad news. The university was profiting from an unaccredited program that does not demonstrate best practices in any of the disciplines. So what happened was that I started to ask a lot of questions. I said, why is this happening? What I found is in my research is that frequently this was run out of an administrative office. College credit was being rewarded for high school work. The person who oversaw the office, because I got to know the teachers who were teaching my program, the teachers told me, well, we were just told that they just had to do 1 additional assignment. The administrative entity is tremendously understaffed and underfunded. So that income that's being generated, because they pay now around $380 per class, does not go into the office that oversees the program. It goes into the general fund. That accounting I have never been able to get my hands on, although I routinely ask and people now run from me when they see me coming. The PD that was offered for teachers essentially was literally how to access the library databases and how to upload your grades. There was no academic department oversight, and when I asked for support to do that, I was told, well, you can organize anything you want, and you're free to go to any class that you want. And I said, okay, great, so what are the resources? And they said, there aren't any, which means, of course, there was lack of department oversight, lack of resources to actually do anything. There was also a tremendous lack of communication between the administrative entity and the academic chairs. So what did I do? What were the next steps? And this is what endeared me to a host of executive administrators on my campus. And I was doing a lot of this while I was coming up for promotion to full professor, which just made it all the better. First off, I informed all the other chairs that they had this program. Many of them didn't know, so they started to pay attention. My dean didn't even know that in his own department, while he was chair, psychology classes were being offered for college credit. He started to find that out. So part of that was a communication more broadly. We started to demand an accounting of student enrollments in the dual enrollment classes. Now that happens. I actually see the dual enrollment. One of the things I've had to do is track down things such as geography enrollments, because I chair a history and geography department, and they were kind of shifting those around. The other thing is if there was any other department that had the word history in a title, that ended up in my pool. So I got to see things like the theology classes that were being offered, and I would say, hey, you actually have some courses that are being offered in dual enrollment. They just happen to be on my screens, not on yours, because the word history is in there. So one of the things we were able to do is to start seeing these aspects, and then we start to push the institution to gather better data on success and achievement, and there's been none gathered, none. Not only my own institution, but also very little data has been gathered nationally. The other thing that I started to do, and this is how I met Adam, was to begin to encourage the institution to join NACEP and to follow NACEP and disciplinary standards within the institution. And that is going to be a much longer process. I also began to offer professional development to high school teachers. on campus. And that has been an amazing experience just for the context, but also just to see the incredible things that they're doing, which were really phenomenal. We are continuing to work on this within the institution, and it's going to be a very long and difficult process because that means the reallocation of the resources. Lastly, as Vice President for the Teaching Division, this is something that I started to work on within the institution. So a couple of things that have happened more recently is the publication of the dual enrollment issue that was circulated, which led to a lot of conversation, not only within colleagues, but also on the members forum. There was one of the largest conversations that took place this year, digitally, happened regarding dual enrollment. We are now working within the AHA Council to create a dual enrollment must, things that must happen, what the AHA believes should be happening in dual enrollment because these programs are growing. And we will also be working closely with Lee White on this particular issue because now we know too that funding with ESSA being passed is that there is going to be greater allocation. So there are a lot of things, and part of this is that my goal initially was to create awareness about it, to say, look, I didn't know this was happening, and once I started asking other historians, they said, oh yeah, I think we have that program too. And the NACEP website is a great resource because that's how you can actually find out if your institution, or as I found, one of our sister institutions was accredited member, and we were not. So that was a great tool in shaming my institution, which I use regularly all the time. So this is just kind of kicking it off a little bit, some of the issues and concerns, but again, coming from a private, large, urban university that really has this rapidly growing, what we refer to as college advantage program. And my goal is that if it is an advantage, then we should make it an advantage, rather than essentially something like a cow for an institution.
Well, that's a great story of St. John's journey, and it seems like it's going to be an interesting journey to see how it continues to develop over the years. Thank you, Elaine, for organizing this panel. I want to make sure that this audio is good for recording. And for your leadership, not just at your own university, but also in facilitating the dialogue here within the discipline. I think that is critical. Obviously, those of you who didn't pick this up in the back or haven't seen it, having the publications, the conversations here at your conference, your online discussion forums, it is critical, I think, that these conversations happen within the academic community because, after all, these are intended to be academic programs. And so if we're going to maintain them as academic programs, then faculty within the disciplines need to be engaged in these conversations about the direction that they go. Our higher education system in the United States is really premised on this principle of faculty ownership and oversight over academic quality, over curriculum, over assessment, over faculty credentials. And institutions must step up to the plate to support faculty in performing the critical components of academic oversight. So for those of you who are not familiar with the National Alliance of Concurrent Enrollment Partnerships, which is the organization NACEP that I run, please know that I wear two hats in my job as the executive director of the organization. The first is that I lead this national membership organization that represents approximately 400 colleges and universities that operate these programs around the country. So thus, I do represent and advocate on behalf of the model. That being said, I also wear the hat as a program accreditor. NACEP has a set of national quality standards for concurrent enrollment partnerships and runs a peer review accreditation process very similar to other programmatic peer review accreditation in higher education. And so, as wearing that accreditor's hat, NACEP believes strongly that the college courses offered in high schools must be as rigorous as those courses are offered on the sponsored college campus. That high school students taking college courses must be held to the same expectations and standards of achievement as those experienced by on-campus students. High school instructors of college courses need to be held to the same requirements as campus adjunct instructors and are provided support by faculty from within their discipline. And program oversight by the institution as a whole needs to be sufficient to ensure the academic integrity of these courses, regardless of where they taught, regardless of who's sitting in the classroom, and regardless of the delivery method. So these are the guiding principles behind our accreditation process, and it's critical to have these in place if we really want to see students fully realize the benefits of dual and concurrent enrollment. So I'm going to do something dangerous here. As probably the only non-historian in the room, I'm going to use my limited time to provide you with a historical narrative on how and why dual and concurrent enrollment programs have risen in prominence over the years. I'm hoping there are very few education historians in the room, and that you'll forgive me for any missteps that I make in my analysis. So if we really want to truly understand the issues that are confronting higher education today, it is important to step back in time, right? So the birthplace of the American community college system in 1901 is really the place where I'd like us to take us to start with. University of Chicago partnered with Joliet Township High School to create something called Joliet Junior College. So in 1901, approximately 2% of what we now consider to be college-age population were enrolled in post-secondary education. It was reserved for the elite few, and that's certainly what University of Chicago was founded on. Now, this innovation created the academic mirror of the first 2 years of the University of Chicago experience, the first 2 years of coursework, for students who wished to pursue that college education in their home community. Now, what was going on in 1901 that led to this? The university saw that there was a rapid demographic change happening in the country. Increased numbers of middle-class students and families demanding higher education for their kids. They came up with this new model to support these student transitions. In a symbolic way, they created the ultimate pathway for students to transition from high school to college. You literally walked up a flight of stairs because Joliet Junior College was on the upper floors of the high school. For the first 6 decades, Joliet Junior College existed only in that building and has since, expanded to their own campus. So over a century later, I think our nation still faces some similar and parallel challenges when you consider the remarkable growth and demographic shifts in the student populations that we see today in both secondary and post-secondary education. I'm still waiting for the college historian at Joliet Junior College. I have requested to research whether or not it was the first college to offer what we now call concurrent enrollment or dual enrollment. But nonetheless, today Joliet remains committed to these student transitions. It has the largest program in the Chicagoland area and perhaps the second largest in the state of Illinois. So let's jump ahead to the 1950s, okay? Another time in our history where we've got remarkably rapid demographic change happening. Increased access to education, emphasis on meritocracy, growing middle class, and new federal and state commitments to higher education. Why new federal and state commitments to higher education in the 50s? Federal investment in higher education did go back to the original land-grant colleges and universities in the late 1800s, but significantly expanded during World War II and then in the 50s as part of the Cold War effort as well to support the defense and science industries. And also in higher education particularly, the expanded post-war because of the GI Bill. Likewise, there was considerable investment and growth by states in higher education during this time period. The Truman Commission in 1947 set an agenda for access and equity in higher education, which led to the establishment and expansion of publicly funded community college systems across the country. State University System of New York was established in 1948, and that time period culminated with the adoption of the California Master Plan for Education in 1960, which set up the Cal State system, the University of California system, and the California Community College system. So this was a time where there was also on the high school side considerable commentary on the quality of high school education and the need to create a more seamless system in order to compete in the Cold War. 1955, Norwich Free Academy and 6 other high schools in Connecticut joined up with the University of Connecticut's High School Cooperative Program. The Connecticut Association of Secondary School Principals reached out to the University of Connecticut, and you'll hear a little bit more about University of Connecticut's program a little later, and said, we need to create opportunities for our academically advanced students to begin embarking on college in their senior year. This is the birthplace, to the best of my knowledge, of what NACEP defines as concurrent enrollment, that specific model where college credit-bearing courses are taught to high school students by college-approved high school teachers. Those 7 high schools in Connecticut in 1955 piloted I believe just with composition. I think history maybe didn't come until 56 or 57. We'd have to go back and check with them. But by the end of the 50s, St. Louis University, I think in 1958, 59, had also embarked on an experiment with 2 of its feeder Catholic high schools. First article that I found on this in 1961, New Directions in Higher Education, identified about 3 dozen dual enrollment programs across the country, mostly at 4-year universities as well as the California community colleges, all of which at that time were focused on enrolling academically superior students. Continued to emerge in isolated locations throughout the 70s. I hadn't known that St. John's went back to the 70s as well. By the early of the 1980s, you started to see clusters of programs that would develop where the model had been taken off at one university or college in the area and others had copied it. So in Missouri, partly because of St. Louis University getting involved early in the era, we saw some as well as in Indiana. We'll hear a little bit more about Indiana, Utah, upstate New York, Minnesota, and Washington State. Now, the late 80s and early 90s, we began to see a few states enacting statewide policies to encourage more institutions to develop program and to create opportunities for students across the state, not just based upon geography. And so places like Minnesota, Utah, Virginia, and Arkansas really started looking at this as a statewide model back then. Now, the period of the 90s was the period where we saw rapid growth throughout the country. Beginning of the 90s, perhaps about 200 programs around the country. By the end of the 90s, about 2,000 institutions of higher education offering some sort of dual or concurrent enrollment opportunities. And really, in some ways, the number of institutions offering has plateaued because 3/4 of public universities do offer some dual enrollment programming, and virtually every community college in the country. What's happening is those programs are shifting and maturing and growing in different ways. So this was in this context of this rapid growth in the 90s is when our organization was founded. Individuals involved in these programs and the longer established programs found each other on the sidelines of other conferences and created a national organization to support them. So if you look back across the 60 years of growth from when UConn first established this model, you'll see that there's been a steady expansion of the purpose and mission of these programs. Those early programs in the 80s were focused up through the 80s, were focused almost exclusively on providing accelerated coursework to challenge advanced students who were otherwise kind of bored in high school or needing opportunities to move on, reducing some of the duplication between the high school curriculum and the college curriculum. Starting in the 90s, we started to see an emphasis by some institutions on dual and concurrent enrollment and career pathways. It's a different subject area, certainly, than we're going to be talking about today, and student population, but still with the goal of reducing unnecessary duplication for students on their pathways to degrees. And then starting in the mid-2000s, we started to see many programs focusing on college transition, providing a less risky early college experience for students who are college-bound, but for who degree attainment has been a little bit too elusive. And now we're starting to see more and more states and institutions focusing on dual and concurrent enrollment as critical components of their college affordability initiatives. And so there's this pressure now to reduce the cost of college and utilizing dual and concurrent enrollment for that leverage as well. Where does this leave us now that we're at a place where 1 in 5 college students, and really probably more than that are not counted, arriving at college having already completed 1 or more college courses? I believe the responsible course of action is for faculty to take ownership of these programs and ensure that the participating students are receiving a high-quality college education. This trend is not going away, and if history faculty choose to bury their heads in the sand rather than participate in improving the quality of these programs, then other providers are going to step in. Third-party curriculum providers, competency-based education where programs like advanced placement are awarding credit by exam, for-profit providers of low-quality online courses. Instead, let's allow our institutions of higher education to fully integrate dual and concurrent enrollment into the academic programming of their institutions. Let's maintain faculty control and institutional autonomy over what constitutes a college class and how to assess student learning in that course over the course of a semester. For many people, the vision of college is oil and vinegar. High school is oil, college is vinegar. There's this clear boundary between the two, and left to their own devices, they're never truly going to mix. I really do believe, and have seen it happen, that concurrent enrollment can be that, since I'm not with chemistry faculty here, emulsifier, okay, to really create that salad dressing where students have the ability to cross that oil and vinegar boundary and experience college expectations while still enrolled in high school. Or faculty members can cross that oil and vinegar boundary and collaborate within their disciplines to align curriculum and align assessments. And schools and colleges as institutions can cross that boundary and move beyond the blame game as to why our students aren't succeeding and to true collaboration and resource sharing. So with that, I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thanks. I want to second thanks to Elaine for starting the conversation, and thank you all for coming to engage in this conversation with us today. I'm also looking forward to the conversation later. So I come to this issue with a number of different perspectives, having experienced dual enrollment in various roles over the last few years. In these few minutes, I'd like to share some of those experiences with you and raise some of the issues I think this discussion signals for stakeholders in secondary schools, students, teachers, and administrators, as well as stakeholders in the academy. I taught dual enrollment courses at a small Connecticut high school in history and American studies for several years before becoming a school administrator. In the latter role, I coordinated these courses across the school. Let me start by explaining why my school began offering dual enrollment with my own American Studies course, first in 2009. My school was and continues to be committed to college graduation of our students, all of whom, or the vast majority of whom, are first-generation college students. We're so committed to the school that we support our students with advising, school visits, and workshops throughout their college years with dedicated staff for this purpose, and we invite them back to provide program feedback to us each year. We began investigating dual enrollment as part of a larger project to improve the persistence of our graduates in college. Our alumni told us that even when academically prepared, they were not prepared for the expectations of college assignments or the modalities of learning that they faced in college. Mostly first-generation students of color, they told us that they struggled with motivation, that they struggled to find community, and that they struggled with their identity in college. These were things they said that made them want to come home, and that made persistence a challenge. My American Studies course was designed in collaboration with the UConn Early College Experience Program, the dual enrollment program that you just heard about, which they call the ECE program. It was offered first to seniors as an elective, and later became a capstone course that all seniors at the school took. The course was truly college level. It focused on the origins and development of racial identity and racial inequality in America. Students read Kathleen Brown, they read Gil Biederman, they read Thomas Segru, and many other scholarly works in the course. They read, I can confidently say, more than the typical UConn freshman in any humanities course I've ever seen. In response to our alumni feedback, I structured the class, which met on our usual 5-day-a-week schedule, so there were no administrative concessions that allowed me to structure this course differently. But I did structure it differently within those confines. I lectured once a week, for example. I lectured in the same way that I lectured when a graduate instructor at Yale University. In fact, I used some of the same lectures that I used from that experience. In many classes, I delivered those same lectures. I held discussion section with my students regularly on a regular schedule. I assigned few assignments that were worth a lot. This is something kids said that they struggled with in college. We met 3 times a week for class. On the other 2 days of the week, I held a kind of captive office hours in my room. Sometimes I sat at my desk and worked. The only requirement of students was that they work on this course during that time. They could work quietly together, as they would in a library at college. They could work on their own. They could make an appointment to work with me during that time, but they had to work on assignments or reading for the course. Over the course of the year, students discussed very sensitive and important issues related to racial identity. We were able within that course to broach topics that other courses in our school couldn't really touch. In their final paper, they supported, refuted, or amended Cornel West's thesis from Nihilism in Black America using texts, films, and documents we had studied. Because all of my students were UConn students, They, like me, had library privileges, including access to databases on the library website. Many students left for college, or my students, all of my students left for college, having written a paper utilizing scholarly articles. They knew how to navigate the library. This is something that seems small, but is not to a first-generation college student. Kids were, I think, both practically and psychologically hindered by their inability to do that before on their college campuses. The entire course was an exercise in exposure, controlled failure, and identity building. Students learned what to expect, and they developed a stronger sense of their identity as students of color, something that was easily undermined as a college freshman. There were moments in my course when my students felt overwhelmed by college. Excuse me, I lost my place. But fortunately, I was there to coach them through, and the stakes were low. It was in these moments that my students learned what they were made of and that they remediated critical academic gaps in preparation for freshman year. Even those who earned below a grade of 73, which is the lowest grade UConn will confer credit for, even those students cited the course leader as the most important preparation that they had for college. This course, together with an academic writing course offered by a colleague of mine, became, in their first year, the most frequently named courses when we asked alumni what helped them persist in college. These responses came from our students across the spectrum. Students who went to Eastern Connecticut State University, which is the least selective of the state colleges in Connecticut, students at Smith, students at Princeton, students across that spectrum. They and their parents urge us each year to offer more courses like these. But as I moved into school administration, I learned that there are limits to increasing the offerings of concurrent enrollment programs. The two major limits that we faced expanding ECE in our school, where I have to say as an administrator, I was proud of the quality of our staff, were teacher preparation and UConn's course design requirements in some disciplines. UConn administers its program centrally with common teaching requirements. So teachers must have master's degrees in the content areas they teach. But it coordinates UConn departments to approve syllabi, provide mandatory professional development days, and administer yearly site visits. So while there are common requirements for becoming a UConn ECE instructor, administration of the program is actually done by department, by university department. My syllabus underwent revision as a result of UConn's oversight. And through my years teaching ECE, American Studies, and history courses, the syllabi evolved as I learned more from the professional development and the department liaison's direct coaching of me. The department liaison was a professor at one of UConn's satellite campuses, and the quality of the person in this position was critical in the excellent experience I and my students had with ECE. She engaged with me, my course, and my students much the way that I strive to do now as a district-level instructional administrator. Additionally, I found as a teacher and a site administrator, the other ECE-affiliated faculty and the central ECE administrators to be consistently focused on promoting quality, expanding access, and supporting ECE teachers. As we at the AHA investigate this issue and determine how best to support strong programs, I urge us to look at models that are working and to consider secondary school perspectives. In addition to college persistence, ECE offerings at my school directly correlated with an increase in the number of our graduates who declare history majors, something of which I'm incredibly proud. At UConn ECE workshops over the years, I've built a network of some of the most talented secondary educators in the state. These teachers include growing numbers of PhDs and former academic historians like myself, who have utilized UConn ECE to access the resources, academic freedom, and legitimacy they need to offer college-level courses to their students. Teachers want the very things that college professors on campuses value when they design a high-quality course. While teachers need support, we need to be careful that we do not unintentionally undervalue secondary instructors simply because of the venue in which they teach, particularly as more and more academic historians are entering secondary education for their careers. From my own graduate school experience, limited college teaching experience, and wide high school experience, I've concluded that teacher quality varies widely at all levels. The AHA represents history teaching and teachers in all of these levels. Finally, at schools like mine, ECE courses are helping to level the playing field for first-generation college students. And thus, I think it's important to note, there are increasing diversity of historians and history teachers in history classrooms, in high schools, K through 16 rooms across the world. They not incidentally, ECE programs or concurrent enrollment programs on school campuses, on our campus, has proven to have many benefits over programs to which our students took courses at the university campus, at schools like Yale or Southern Connecticut State. I'm happy to explain more about this if folks are interested, but we did not see the results from those kinds of programs that we saw from in-house ECE programs. I'm going to leave it there. I'm happy and eager to hear your questions and to engage in this discussion with you as we move forward.
Okay, is this on? What I'm going to do in my presentation is sort of get at the nuts and bolts of how dual enrollment works in Texas. Because prior to getting into conversations within the AHA about dual enrollment and how it works nationally, I was assuming Texas was how it worked nationally. And I didn't realize that that's not the case. And so,
Although it should be, right?
although the point being is you laugh because obviously it's referring to Texas. Texas has a very strong component related to maintaining rigor for dual enrollment. Much stronger than I think many of the other states that have dual enrollment. And so that statutory requirements around dual enrollment have then empowered the institutions of higher education to really maintain rigor, particularly at the department level, right? Because the institution is going to refer to the department or the experts within the discipline. So keep this in mind. This is sort of the unique story of dual enrollment on a national landscape and why it's successful where I come from at South Texas College. So let's get to the hiring of faculty. High school faculty have to have a master's to teach a dual enrollment class. They can't just have a bachelor's degree. And they have to have a master's degree within, obviously, history. Besides having the master's, all the master's does is gives that faculty member the opportunity to apply to be able to teach dual enrollment at their respective schools. So when a faculty member says, I got my master's, I want to teach dual enrollment, they contact the department chair, and the department chair then has a hiring committee. The hiring process for all faculty at the department level will be the same process a dual enrollment instructor has to go through. The only difference is that a dual enrollment instructor is not competing with candidates from around the country for that one slot. So we have that sort of expectation of what we expect for all our faculty to be at for our dual enrollment instructors. And it works like any other job process. They have to submit an application, background check, the vita, the transcripts, and all that stuff. Then they have a job interview. In the job interview, they have to have a teaching demo, and usually that is where they get tripped up, the weaker candidates. And then they have a Q&A with us. Some people who have failed, and we have a large number of faculty who have failed to be able to teach dual enrollment at my institution. Were surprised, for instance, when they received questions about their research. Like, really? Why are you asking about research? And what we found is the most successful candidates who work for us have all completed a master's thesis as opposed to comping out of with the master's. So that thesis is not only given them abilities to talk to what we do as historians, it also has trained them to present content material in such a fashion during the job demo that you do not get from people who just do the comp out, right? What the comp out people tend to do is give you bits and information that's unconnected. The people who've written a master's thesis are able to give you a narrative arc, usually related to a thesis, that conveys the information within 10 or 20 minutes, depending on what we give them, very well. And then they can engage these other questions. And then we also ask questions about policy and what's going on in Texas. So they have to be a very well-rounded candidate. So to say they do get accepted. And so then they go teach their courses. They are yearly evaluated. This last year, I evaluated, I think, 15 or 16 of the dual enrollment instructors in the classroom. I give them feedback. I tell them they were successful or not successful, depending on what the categories are. And we have certain categories in our form, student engagement, so on and so forth. The chair then meets with them in a sit-down interview. When they do that sit-down interview, they have to turn in their packet that they turned in, what they're doing for continuing development, so on and so forth. Basically, the same evaluation process all our regular faculty go through. They get it every year. Okay. And that's how we're able to maintain then the rigor and the standards within the teaching of history at my institution. What we started doing this year, or what I initiated this year, was bringing in all the dual enrollment faculty from the respective high schools to our department meetings, which we meet 3 times a semester, once a month essentially, to get them much more integrated into the department and the department culture. Next semester, they're going to be getting cards from STC so that when they do ask publishers for certain things that we normally ask for, the publisher actually realizes, oh, you are a college instructor, because they are. They are our colleagues, right? And so to then see how that works out, the feeder institution a few years back, there was some faculty in the faculty senate at UTPA, University of Texas Pan American, raised a ruckus about having dual enrollment students in their upper level classes, and they were failing. And they were failing at these great numbers. And this rather one faculty member, a political scientist, went off and did a news conference and all this other stuff and bewailing the decline of education because of dual enrollment and yada, yada, yada. So I said, okay. So what we did is we did a then analysis of people who were dual enrollment students who went off and took these upper level classes at that institution. Well, the data showed that the dual enrollment students had higher GPAs than the non-dual enrollment students at those classes, including the class that the instructor said, oh, my dual enrollment students are not doing well in my class. It was actually the opposite. The non-dual enrollment students were doing worse in his class than the dual enrollment, but he doesn't know who the dual enrollment student was. And this is one of the dangers of speaking to dual enrollment and not having the research or the data down. And that's one of the things I would like to caution before you make assessments of what dual enrollment is doing or not doing, is to actually do the research and see what's occurring in your location. And our situation at South Texas College, the data is bearing out the benefits to dual enrollment for our students. To give you an idea of numbers though, we do have a large number of dual enrollment students. We have 15,000 dual enrollment students currently out of a population of 34,000. So that's a big chunk. Now, some of the things that come into play here is related to accreditation. And so one of the things we have to we have conflicts then with really with the administration, not with the high school faculty. The administration is going to want to curtail academic freedom. So we're coming up with a Bill of Rights that we're going to give all the administrators, the faculty already know this, but we're going to give the administrators, that faculty member, yeah, he's your employee at your school district, but he works for us when it's in that classroom. Okay. And I'm kind of running out of time there. So I want to end it with the 3 benefits I think we should think of when it comes to dual enrollment. One is it can help break the cycle of poverty by allowing students who come from the lower socioeconomic levels of our community to achieve a college education. 2, in teaching dual enrollment, I've had much more conversations with high school faculty who approach teaching very differently than a college faculty, right? We tend to have very high stakes testing and what we consider a college level course. Whereas the dual enrollment instructors who are teaching a college level course implement lower stakes repetitive work that is actually showing better retention of material than what I was doing before. I actually redesigned my classes based on my experiences and interactions with my colleagues who are teaching dual enrollment at the high school level. And so what has occurred is now forcing me to rethink how we teach history. Then I find out that the scholarship's been there for about 10 years. It's been saying this all along. So just if you go research teaching and learning in history, they've actually been saying this forever. It's just not to my personal experience. I didn't get that. And then 4th, and this is something I want to pursue this next semester much more strongly, is dual enrollment can provide us the opportunity. We work closely with our colleagues and integrate them into our department for recruiting majors into history. Because the high school classes in the school districts allow for much greater extracurricular activity and the students will engage in it than the traditional college student who has a job and kids and has all the other responsibilities of adulthood. And so I want to see this as an opportunity to break the cycle of poverty, to rethink how we teach history, and to increase our numbers of majors for history. And I'll stop there. Sorry.
Thank you. Is that on? Is that on? Yeah. Thank you, Elaine, for organizing this. Thank you for 3 really enlightening perspectives. I wish I could say I shared the optimism of Brenda and Trini, but I'm afraid I have a bleaker picture to paint, at least based on my experience in Indiana. So Indiana University, where I teach, has what I would call really a model, or I thought it was model. I think you guys have model programs, but what it touts itself with some justice as a model dual enrollment program known at my institution as the Advanced College Project. Unlike many dual enrollment programs, IU Bloomington is accredited by NACEP and follows that closely, which mandates standards of faculty oversight, credentialing, and professional development, as Adam has suggested. A well-run administrative office oversees all the course offerings in the dual enrollment environment for the university, from biology to French to psychology, and of course, U.S. history, and each subject has a dedicated faculty member drawn from the regular faculty to vet the teacher's applications, to conduct professional development sessions, and training sessions, and to coordinate and participate in site visits. And that's what I do for the U.S. history component. All that said, over the 2+ years that I have spent overseeing the dual enrollment U.S. history program at IU, I've come to have great doubts about its utility and its ability to be reformed in the sort of way that we've been talking about. Dual enrollment's initial purpose, as Adam has suggested, was to make college courses available to the select group of high school students who were really ready for college work. And again, when I listen to Brenda and Trini, I think, yes, and this really actually doesn't just have to be selective. This can be an elevator for people who otherwise might be denied a college education. And that sounds like a great idea if it can be implemented in such a way. Only 10 years ago in Indiana, only 132 students in the entire state took U.S. history dual enrollment classes in high school for college credit. In 2005, the state decided to encourage more students to enroll in dual credit by eliminating barriers to enrollment, as the state's own documents show. Over the past 10 years, then, the push for dual enrollment has expanded considerably, driven by, and here I think Adam's history is very insightful, driven by the perceived necessity to encourage college attendance and to speed up college completion rates by providing more students with credits before they even get to college, and thereby saving them a lot of money. Magically, the numbers of allegedly college-ready high school students have expanded enormously over this period. And again, when I hear Adam's history, this is set up for seniors, advanced students, but that's not how it's being implemented now. And when I hear Brenda's story, I think, yes, if all of the teachers had the kind of background that Brenda had and had taught at Yale, and could introduce their students to Tom Segru, that would be fantastic. But most of our teachers, even the very, very good ones, don't know who Tom Segru is, let alone are in a position to assign his books. Today, nearly 3,800 students, many of them 10th graders, across the state take IU's ACP U.S. history in their high schools for college credit. And those are just the programs overseen by Indiana University, which is the most rigorous one in the state system. The number of dual enrollment credits impacts the A to F ratings that the schools get, which means there's a lot at stake for school administrators who are mandated essentially to implement as many dual enrollment classes as they possibly can. And at $150 for 6 credits, essentially, this offers students and their parents an impossible to refuse savings over the $1,700 cost of the same courses at the university itself. But in my observation, and with all due respect to the hardworking high school teachers, many of whom I'm quite fond of, many of whom I think are fantastic teachers, but at the end of the day, these students are getting what they pay for. Faced with pressure to expand dual enrollment offerings, good faith efforts to maintain rigor in these classes is simply inadequate. And that's a self-critique, if anything. Indiana Commission of Higher Education policy is unequivocal, as is NACEP and so forth. Dual credit courses must be identical in rigor and quality. Course syllabi must be identical to course syllabi used in the same courses. Concurrent enrollment students must be held to the same standards of achievement as students in on-campus sections and should be assessed using the same methods, papers, portfolios, quizzes as their on-campus counterparts. Again, in my observation, realistically, these standards are simply not enforceable, scattered across hundreds of high schools around the state with fundamentally very little oversight. The state acknowledges that the legislative mandate to it, there's a legislative mandate. Every school must have 2 dual enrollment courses, and the state recognizes that this has led to a problem that even the most enthusiastic boosters of this recognize, which is that there's a dearth of qualified teachers for the program. Both NACEP and institutional accreditors expect universities to apply the same credentialing criteria to concurrent enrollments as adjuncts are held to on campus, as I'm pleased to hear Texas actually is doing that. But that, I think, is an exception. In practice, with the rapid expansion of the program in Indiana, at least, with massive pressure from parents, teachers, and school districts to implement this program, it really is impossible to hold the line on that particular standard. Since the perspectives issue came out, the Midwestern Accrediting Agency, the Higher Learning Commission, has mandated that all dual enrollment teachers have at least 18 graduate credit hours in the subject they are teaching. That's correct. Right now in Indiana and most other Midwestern states, as far as I can tell, dual enrollment classes in U.S. history are in fact taught by teachers who do not have any graduate training in the field of history. Just take the program that I oversee. Again, a relatively well-run program with good oversight, 47 teachers. 6 of them have 18 credit hours in graduate history courses. 10 more have between 6 and 17 hours of credits. In other words, only 1/3 of the teachers in the dual enrollment program have ever taken a single graduate level course in history. Yet we are hiring them essentially as adjuncts to teach history at the college level. When confronted with the reality that enforcement of these rules would drastically reduce the state's ability to offer dual enrollment classes, there has been incredible pushback from the legislators, from the teachers, from the schools. There's no incentive to train the teachers to take the time and to pay the money to get more graduate training. We'd be glad to offer that, of course. But increasingly you hear cries, including from the editorial board of the newspaper in Bloomington, Indiana, that that high school teachers are equally qualified to teach college-level classes as those of us with PhDs. They're probably even better because they have experience, and we all know that having a PhD means you cannot teach. There's also been a lot of language about, graduate students teach those introductory level courses anyway. Focusing on the disconnect between the growing number of students in Indiana taking these classes and the dearth of teachers qualified to teach them, what are the solutions? And I'm going to put that aside. There are a number of different possible solutions, including delivering them online, trying to train the teachers, if that's possible, raising the standards. We can talk about that in a few moments. Perhaps an expanded dual enrollment program. And here again, what Brenda's remarks I found heartening, could be used to fund more PhD students or even help hire all those unemployed PhDs in U.S. history. It's frustrating, to say the least, that we have a national glut of well-trained history PhDs, while many states continue to ask high school teachers without MA degrees in history to teach ever more college courses. And I'm confident that, well, maybe I'm not so confident. I mean, Brenda's experience is a good antidote to this. But I would worry that if we said, yeah, sure, you want dual enrollment? We have all these PhDs around here. Why don't you just hire them in your – they'll say, well, they're not qualified to teach in high school. Unfortunately, I've come to the conclusion that, at least in Indiana, the main purpose of dual enrollment is simply to make a university education less expensive, not more rigorous, not more accessible, less expensive by allowing students to opt out of all of those introductory level courses that they would otherwise have to take with people who have PhDs in U.S. history. And again, this has happened at Indiana University. I'll wrap up in a minute here, in that we've seen, and I think talking to colleagues around the country, a drastic crash in lower division course enrollments in that bread and butter course U.S. survey that many of us have really dedicated our lives to teaching. And far from hiring graduate students to teach these classes, we all know, teaching U.S. history, this is what we do. When we have a PhD in history, we get in the classroom and we teach those freshmen and sophomores U.S. history. This is our one chance to show them what history really is. But we're delegating it, or allowing it to be delegated, to the high schools. No matter how good the high school teachers are, we're giving away here the main contribution we make to society as historians. who do research, who are trained to do this. And once we give that away, we really have very little left to stand on, I fear anyway. The cost savings this entails really are sleight of hand. They fail to count the cost of what one might call underutilized capacity. To draw on a model of higher education much loved these days, the state maintains an enormous investment in human capital, its full-time faculty, which once served to produce lower division FTEs, for example, in the U.S. survey. So I said to people, look, the state's already invested X hundreds of thousands of dollars in me. They can't, I have tenure. I've got 20 more years. I'd love to teach survey for those 20 years. But no, you've already invested that money, but now you're going to go have these courses offered in high school. As the rapid increase in dual enrollment erodes the numbers of lower division students, our capacity to teach large number of college freshmen and sophomores in state university systems built up over decades of investment comes to resemble a giant steel mill reduced to producing bathtub plugs. I would go so far as to suggest, with all due respect, that dual enrollment constitutes an existential threat to the existence of the lower division history survey. If we're willing to give that away, then we shouldn't worry about dual enrollment. If we still see that as a central part of our mission, we need to do everything we can to at least stem the tide, not just, although I think it's a wonderful idea, not just to insist on levels of rigor in those dual enrollment classes that aren't going to go away, but also to insist that there's a limit to how many high school students genuinely are ready to take college-level classes. Thank you.
I, too, would like to thank Elaine for organizing this panel. I am heartened by the comments we've heard from Brenda and Trini. I think my comments will fall more along the line of Alex's, looking at the mixed messages that come from the dual credit narrative. Up front, I will acknowledge that dual credit, we call them dual credit in Missouri, so I'll just refer to that terminology. The programs offer a, not the, but a legitimate response to the obvious concerns about the cost of higher education. I think that's clear. I will also acknowledge up front that we have some amazing high school teachers offering excellent dual credit courses from my department, but the system can and must be improved if we are to ensure the academic integrity of our universities. And then also, I just want to state up front that my view of what I was bringing to the panel here was more bringing some of my anecdotal comments as a department chair, as conversation starters. I'm not really offering necessarily the solutions that we just heard some of, solutions that this committee and the AHA will continue to work on. But as the chair of a history department, a department which earns bread and butter from general education credits, I want to offer that perspective. Also, I want to offer a perspective of a parent who just had a recent high school graduate, and so it kind of gives me a little slightly different view into how this worked. But I'll begin with my department chair perspective. This first challenge has to do with pressure from the players who have a stake in dual credit, but according to the university and national accreditation guidelines, may not be decision makers in the operation of a dual credit program. 2 years ago, my dual credit liaison, which is a faculty member, identified a teacher who she believed did not have sufficient content-specific background to be teaching dual credit history. I had earlier accepted the teacher in question because I was a new chair. I didn't know what I was doing. I was signing things. Here, sign this. Fine. And I had a colleague vouch for this. It was one of our own graduates who was out teaching in the high schools. And this teacher had indicated he would actually start taking some graduate courses in history. My department, we usually require the MA, and as the standards say, we want to hold that threshold. So I made an exception. However, during an on-site visit, this teacher told my faculty liaison that he actually had no plans at all to pursue an MA in history and already had an MS in education and curriculum. Thus, my faculty liaison and I began paperwork to remove the dual credit teacher from our program, given the absence of graduate history credit, and there being no intention to follow through on another master's degree, a condition that technically violated our university dual credit policy. A few weeks later, I received a call asking why we had submitted paperwork to terminate the relationship. I explained our position based on the teacher's lack of credentials. I was told that the inquiry had come from the dean of the College of Education, a different college than mine, who had been called by the district superintendent where that teacher worked to complain about our intention to remove the teacher from the dual credit program. I learned two things very quickly in my second year as chair from this episode. One, the political stakeholders in dual credit extend far beyond my department and even my college. And two, approving teachers is like checking them into the Hotel California. They won't be checking out anytime soon. A second challenge for dual credit falls under a category I'll just call general education, some of which Alex touched upon, which the chairs amongst you will know that keeps our faculty schedules full, but also generates a lot of money for programs that might be more faculty or equipment intensive than history is, those other departments in our colleges. As historians, we praise the virtues of general education because of its liberal arts content as the font of critical thinking and the foundation for lifelong learning. And we certainly believe in the need to keep history as a vital component of general education. Yet with the increasing use of dual credit, we are willing to then turn around and farm out these same general education courses to high school teachers who may have the MA degree or may not. And again, that gets to the inconsistent standards, I think, that are applied in the different states. And so this seems to me a mixed message. Further, and somewhat obviously, the potential loss of students taking gen ed history at university because they took it for dual credit in high school also potentially reduces the credit hours generated by those faculty, as Alex indicated. At first glance, this result may look like a boon. Hey, more time for research, for upper level courses, for graduate supervision. However, reducing the gen ed load of my faculty comes at a high price. With the national decline in the number of history majors leading to diminished upper level numbers, a decrease in demand on the front end puts a two-ended squeeze on history departments. For example, I'll give you an example of my current semester. I'm offering 100 fewer history gen ed seats this spring than last, and my enrollment is still 6% down. And this is despite record enrollment growth at my university. So something's not quite working there. And a similar pattern has occurred in the English department as well. The obvious end game here is a loss of, ultimately, a potential loss of full-time faculty lines, which reduces the scope and specialization of history offered at the university and contributes to perhaps a further shrinking of the discipline. Yet another challenge that dual credit has handed us centers on recruitment. And this is interesting because I find Trini's comments fascinating because you see it as a boon for recruitment. I'm seeing something a little bit different. In today's STEM-dominated world in which the current educational ethos is growing more utilitarian and focused more on post-graduation earning potential, the number of students coming into university as declared history majors is already decreasing, or at least it is at a lot of departments where I've spoken to the chairs. However, we've always been able to recruit majors from our gen ed courses, and that is why we want our best instructors, even our full professors, teaching gen ed history, and that's something we're able to do at a regional comprehensive. That initial survey course provides an invaluable opportunity for us to introduce students to the discipline, to engage them in the work of historians in a way that some of the high school instructors that I've supervised and have had my faculty supervise are not able to do. Thus, reduced access to incoming students in gen ed courses will hurt our ability to recruit majors, especially when we find that the better, more qualified students, those who we want to attract to our majors, will have generally been the ones who took the dual credit in the first place, because they're on it in high school. They're on the ball, they're getting their stuff, they're getting their ducks in a row, and they are taking their dual credit, and they're coming to my university and majoring in, construction management. They're not coming in as history majors. A final challenge from the perspective as a department chair is what I will delicately call credit laundering. Now, I borrowed this phrase from a colleague in another department, so if you don't like the phrase, I'll tell him. Here's how it works. Our university has clear guidelines, or somewhat clear guidelines, on the criteria necessary to be a dual credit teacher. However, the local school district also has a dual credit agreements with a nearby community college that does not have such criteria. High school students can take history or literature courses from a teacher not qualified to teach dual credit with the university, and subsequently earn the dual credit with the community college. Then, due to the transfer articulation agreements that now exist between community colleges and universities, those dual credits are then accepted into the university via transfer. In effect, those credits have been laundered to make them acceptable at the university. This lack of consistent standards appears to be an Achilles heel of the system, at least in Missouri. I'll provide a further example of this lack of standards. is from a colleague in the English department, but could apply for history. Their department requires a master's degree to teach Comp 1, and they require a PhD to teach any literature, even gen ed literature. The local community college, however, will allow high school teachers without a master's degree to offer both composition and literature dual credit courses. Two institutions of higher learning, two different sets of criteria, but transferable credits between them, and this is problematic. As a parent, and there's my other perspective, just to touch on it briefly, I saw dual credit from this different lens. My son took several honors courses a couple of years ago through his high school career that granted dual credit through either my university or the local community college. He didn't take any of the courses for the dual credit. However, many of his classmates did. Thus, the student sitting next to him paid the dual credit fee, which, by the way, at least for our university, is discounted about 67%, while he did not pay the fee. However, the course is the same for both students. It seems to me that a course that is supposed to be equivalent to its college counterpart should have elevated requirements. Now, granted, the dual credit courses are generally designated as the honors courses at the high school level, but because our local high school has an open enrollment policy into those honors courses, any student who wishes to take an honors course can do so. So any student who wishes to take those honors dual credit courses can do so. Such is not the case at a university, where students must meet admission requirements, standards, before they can enroll in classes. Moreover, are such high school honors classes equivalent to college classes? I think, yes, they can be, but I've seen a lot of them that are not. If so, if they are the same, then we're accepting that the only difference between these classes and the ones taught on university campuses is the fee. Or should there be something more, which the student completes for college credit that lifts the class above the high school version? Now, perhaps and here's an argument that was given to me, perhaps the teacher, the school administrator, or the university dual credit coordinator would argue conversely that my son was actually benefiting by receiving a college level course without having to pay for the college credit that came with it, and that it was simply our decision to not pay for that credit offered. Having seen the difficulty level of the high school courses he was enrolled in, I would disagree. And he would too, after finding history and literature much more challenging and far more demanding on the college campus in his freshman year. Students have complained for some time that the introductory college history course is frustratingly similar to the high school courses that they already completed. Thus, eliminating this perceived duplication saves time and money and becomes the impetus and justification for dual credit. But perhaps we've been asking the wrong question all along. Perhaps instead of asking how we could give college credit for the high school course and move on very efficiently, perhaps we should have asked, hey, how do we raise the college level course to a higher level? When the standards and the guidelines are inconsistent from region to region, and when dual credit history seems to be edging out what I've perceived to be more demanding AP history courses, at least in my school district, I'll be done in a second. And when the politics of education can trump the importance of what is learned, then I think we have a system sending mixed messages and in need of attention and improvement and actually in need of this kind of discussion. And thank you.
Can I add some two little things to Eric's?
Of course you may.
So, two things. I mean, that was really spot on, I thought, Eric. So, two things. One, this is the thing that shocked me the most when I started going out on site visits. There were these classes that had dual enrollment students and ordinary students in them together. I don't think NACEP imagines it this way either, but it happens all the time. These are supposed to be dual enrollment classes, not dual enrollment students. And that really, I think that's something that is enforceable. Secondly, that credit laundering, that is the key. And this is what's happening in Indiana and all the states overseen by the Higher Learning Commission, which issued these new rules, which essentially eliminate credit laundering because they say teachers in dual enrollment classes must have 18 graduate credit hours in the area they teach. So there's been this outcry. There's been so much pushback. It's unbelievable because of the political stakeholders. Now, it's that credit laundering that has made our ability to enforce that standard, which we would like to at the flagship, impossible for exactly the reasons described by Eric. That every time, and with the best intentions, I really like the people who administer the program. When I say to them, this teacher, they might be good, but they really have very little graduate or credits in history. They say, well, we could turn them away, but then the school administrator will just take it to the community college and it'll be completely unenforceable. So we let them teach for us. So the HLC, is going to eliminate that, but they've already managed to, it was supposed to be implemented in September 2017. Yeah, a year and a half from now, but they've already got a 5-year dispensation. So, and I think it's just going to wither on the vine.
So just want to thank everybody who is on the panel, Adam, Brenda, Trini, Alex, and Eric. I think we all had different approaches and experiences. We have an array of models. We have some very good models, and we have also some not so good models. We also touched on lack of consistent standards, lack of national studies really demonstrating the effectiveness, lack of communication within institutions, as well as forced communication between different stakeholders or really kind of taking control. So we also see an array of models. So what I would like to do is first, if we can stop recording for a bit, and then if we can open it up to the floor.